Asian-Pacific American Heritage Month. May is Asian-Pacific American Heritage Month, a celebration of Asians and Pacific Islanders in the United States. Asian Americans and Pacific Island Heritage Month is a period for duration of the month of May for recognizing the contribution and influence of Asian Americans and Pacific Island Americans to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States. Asian Pacific encompasses all of the Asian continent and the Pacific Islands of Malaysia. The first Asians documented in the Americas arrived in 1587 with Filipinos landing in California. The next group of Asians documented in what would be the United States were Indians in Jamestown. In 1778, the first Chinese to reach what would be the United States arrived in Hawaii. In 1884, the first Koreans arrived in the United States. Here are 5 moments from Asian American history that you should know. In the 1854 court case, People v. Hall determines that Chinese people cannot testify against white defendants. George Hall had been convicted of murder through the testimony of 3 Chinese eyewitnesses. However, on appeal, the court disqualified the testimony. California banned specific groups, Negroes, Blacks, Indians, and Mulattoes from testifying against whites, but Chinese was not included. This judge then decided that the Chinese were Indian and/or Black. This decision spewed racism, citing the imminent threat that if Chinese people can testify against whites, they will become full equal citizens. This marked the beginning of how discrimination against Asians became the norm. Thomas Nash cartoon, "The Negro must go and the Chinese must go. The poor barbarians can't understand our civilized Republican form of government." On February 19, 1862, President Lincoln makes California coolie trade ban nationally. The coolie trade began in the 19th century and became a global system in the 1830s to circulate indigenous Asian workers to replace once enslaved Black Africans on plantations.
The word coolie comes from a Hindu word that means laborers. With the decline in the African trade, the new coolie trade was open, bringing men from the Far East primarily to work in Peru and Cuba, but also on the west coast of the United States. This trade was legal because they came over as indentured servants, even though few survived their period of indenture. Many were used in the United States in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. For the laborers being brought over, this trade was as terrible as the African trade and had about the same death rate during transportation. In the African slave trade or the coolie trade, human trafficking was essentially the same, just on different sides of the country.
On March 28, 1898, the Supreme Court upholds birthright citizenship in United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark is a Chinese American born in San Francisco to Chinese parents in 1873. When he returns from a visit to China in 1895, immigration authorities denies his re-entry, citing Chinese exclusion laws that barred Asians from both immigration and U.S. citizenship. Wong, however, asserted his rights as a U.S. citizen to be permitted back into his country.
Wong Kim Ark was a native-born American born of Chinese immigrant parents in California in the 1870s. He had made several trips to China a few times before, but in 1894 he goes again, and he comes back through San Francisco. And at that time, the San Francisco Collector of Customs is a well-known anti-Chinese opponent named John Wise. And he was eager for a test case to have the U.S. government consider, is there such a thing as a native-born Chinese American who can be a U.S. citizen if his parents are ineligible for citizenship under the nation's naturalization laws? So even though Wong Kim Ark had been allowed to re-enter the United States a few times before as a native citizen born in the United States, John Wise decides to deny him re-entry in 1894.
At stake was a bedrock constitutional issue. Under the 14th Amendment, could a Chinese American born in the U.S. of immigrant parents be considered an American citizen or not? The U.S. attorney, arguing the government's case, insisted that even though Wong Kim Ark had been born in the United States, it was an accident of birth that did not override the fact that his parents were foreigners, ineligible for citizenship.
Wong Kim Ark fought it all the way to the Supreme Court to establish something that we take for granted today.
In 1898, in a landmark ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court, citing the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment, ruled that Wong Kim Ark, like anyone else born on American soil, was an American citizen.
And this is the case, this is the precedent that establishes a U.S. birthright citizenship for all.
Wong Kim Ark of 1898 is really important because it secures the citizenship status of Chinese born in the United States and all children born of immigrants in the United States.
Japanese-American Yuri Kochiyama became a political activist and was influenced to tackle civil rights after spending 2 years in internment camps during World War II.
We always called the camps relocation centers while we were there. Now we feel it is apropos to call them concentration camps. It is not the same as the concentration camps of Europe. We feel they were death camps. Historically, Americans have always been putting people behind walls. First, there were the American Indians who were put on reservations, Africans in slavery on their lives on plantations, Chicanos doing migratory work in the kind of camps they lived in, and even to the Chinese when they worked on the railroad camps, where they were almost isolated, dispossessed people, disempowered. And I feel those are the things we should fight against so they won't happen again.
Her work extended to the causes impacting Black, Latinx, Indigenous people, and Asian American communities.
I thought, gee, I want to shake his hands too, But I thought, gee, maybe it's not right for me because I'm not Black, and somebody's not going to like that, wondering why Asian wants to do that. So, but I kept watching all of the young Blacks, and I said, doggone it, I'm going to shake his hand. And I thought, well, no matter what, I'm going to at least try. I asked one of the people in CORE, that group named CORE, and they said, well, they don't know what she's going to tell you. He may not want to shake your hands. So it's up to you. You could try and see what happens. So I thought to myself, I am going to try. And so I thought, if he ever looks up a little bit towards where I'm standing, I'm going to yell out to him, can I shake your hands? And when he did, I did do that. I said, Malcolm, can I shake your hands? He looked at me. I think he was surprised it was an Asian woman anyway, and said, what for? And I said, gosh, what do I say to them? I said, I want to congratulate you. I don't know why I said that. And he said, for what? And I thought, gee, gosh, what do I want to congratulate him for? And he said, for what you're doing for your people. And he said, and what am I doing for my people? And I said, oh, now, what shall I say? And I said, I couldn't think of anything else, but I said, I think giving directions. And then he really changed his attitude, and he came out of the circle of people around him and put out his hand, so I ran and I grabbed it.
Kochiyama befriended and collaborated with Malcolm X in the 1960s and continued to work with Black civil rights activists following his death.
In that fateful moment, as Yuri Kochiyama cradled Malcolm's head in her arms, a close associate of Malcolm X, took a photo. It has an almost ethereal quality to it. The fallen warrior, eyes closed, wounds exposed, white shirt stained with blood, being held in the arms of a loved one, Yuri Kochiyama. She's dressed in all black, kneeling on the ground, her back hunched over Malcolm, her hands holding up his head, and her eyes pointed down at his face. Looking at her, you get a sense of fear and panic, but also a certain gentleness and care. A couple weeks later, this photo ended up in the pages of Life magazine, but Yuri's name was nowhere to be found.
In the 1980s, she, along with her husband, campaigned for reparations and a formal government apology for Japanese American interned during World War II. George H.W. Bush signed a law that designated May 1990 as the first Asian American and Pacific Island Heritage Month. We here in the Watts community support and stand with the AAPI community during this difficult time. We will continue to speak up and fight for social justice for our AAPI family.